The snow had been falling for 3 hours when Daniel Hayes's phone lit up the dark bedroom. 1:07 a.m. unknown number. He let it ring twice, stared at the ceiling. The radiator knocked and hissed in the corner of the old craftsman house, and down the hall behind the door with the hand-painted stars. Emma slept without a sound. She always slept without a sound. That was one of the things that still amazed him. 6 years into doing this alone. How deeply an 8-year-old could trust the world to keep turning while she rested. He answered on the third ring. Hello. Outside the wind had picked up. He could hear it pressing against the eaves. A low sustained note like something held in the bedroom was dark except for the pale blue of the phone screen, and in that light his hand looked unfamiliar. Not quite his silence, then a breath, then something that was almost a word but wasn't quite. Please don't hang up. The voice was a woman's, thin as paper, the kind of voice that had been through something tonight. I'm here, Daniel said. He sat up, swung his legs over the edge of the bed and put his feet on the cold floor. I'm right here. What's going on? I think I'm dying. He was fully awake now. I think I'm dying. He was fully awake now. Are you hurt? Do you need me to call? No. I'm at the hospital. Street Vincent. I didn't want to be alone. And I hit the wrong number. And I know this is strange, but please don't hang up. Daniel looked at the window. The street light outside wore a halo of falling snow. He rubbed his jaw. She was at the hospital. She was already with doctors. She needed a voice. I'm not hanging up, he said. My name's Daniel. What's yours? A pause, then very quietly. Sophie. Okay, Sophie. I'm a mechanic. I live about 3 miles from Street Vincent's. I have a daughter named Emma who is 8 years old and convinced that the best breakfast food is cold spaghetti. Can I ask what's going on with you tonight? Another pause. When she spoke again, something had shifted in her voice. The raw terror had not left, but it had made a little room for something else. I had a cardiac episode. They're saying it's stable, but they're keeping me for observation and I just needed to hear someone talk. Cold spaghetti, Daniel said. Every morning I've tried explaining. She's not interested. Sophie made a sound, not quite a laugh, but close enough that Daniel recognized it as the direction something might grow. They talked for 11 minutes. He didn't check the time. He counted later in the parking lot, standing in the snow with his breath fogging and his keys already in his hand. She told him she was 32, that she had flown in from New York 2 days ago, that she had no family in Aspen, that the doctor had told her to rest, but hadn't told her how to stop the particular kind of dread that came from lying still in a hospital room at 1 o'clock in the morning with the monitors beeping and no one who knew her name within 500 miles. When the call dropped a dead zone in the hospital building, he'd learned later. Daniel sat with the phone in his hand for a long moment. He could go back to sleep. He sat there another full minute, phone face down on the mattress. He thought about Emma down the hall, and the fact that she had school tomorrow, and that his first appointment at the shop was at 8 a.m. He thought about the sensible, reasonable, completely defensible argument for simply pulling the covers back up. He had done a lot of things in his life that made sense on paper. He had taken the steady job over the risky one. He had stayed in a marriage 2 years past its natural end because leaving felt like giving up. He had moved to Aspen not because he wanted to, but because it was right for Emma, and it had turned out to be right for him too in ways he hadn't predicted. Most of the good things in his life had arrived sideways from directions he hadn't been watching. He put on his boots instead. Left a note on the kitchen counter. Back soon, Emma. Don't panic. In the large handwriting he used for messages he needed her to read without glasses. Shrugged into his coat, stepped into the white and silent street. The drive to Street Vincent Medical Center took 22 minutes in the snow. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know her room number. He went to the front desk and told a tired young nurse that his friend Sophie had called him and he wanted to make sure she was okay. The nurse looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at his boots, which were tracking snow across the linoleum. Then she looked at the clock. Room 214. She said, "Keep it brief." The door was ajar. Daniel knocked anyway. She was smaller than her voice suggested. That was the first thing. Dark hair against the white pillow, the kind of cheekbones that belonged on magazine covers, except right now they were too sharp, carved thin by whatever the last few weeks had done to her, an IV line in her left arm, a monitor with a green line moving steadily across it, and the small beep, 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 beep. That was the sound of a heart doing its job. She turned her head. Her eyes were dark brown and large, and for 1 second, completely unguarded. "You actually came?" she said. "I was in the neighborhood." He held up the paper cup he'd grabbed from the vending machine in the lobby. "It's hot chocolate. The machine warned me it might not technically contain chocolate. I thought you should know, going in." She stared at him, then something happened in her face. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the architecture of one, the bones of it settling into place. "You're real," she said. "Most days." He set the cup on the bedside tray and pulled the chair from the corner. "How are you feeling?" "Bet. Ter than 2 hours ago. Worse than I'd like." She looked at the window. Through the glass, the snow fell in steady vertical lines. "You drove here in this for a wrong number. You sounded like you needed somebody." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cart rattled down the hallway. The monitor beeped. "I'm sorry to have woken you up. Emma usually gets me up at 6, he said. "Consider yourself ahead of schedule." He expected a deflection. A polished pivot away from the intimacy of the moment. He had read her immediately as someone who maintained careful distances, but instead she looked at him with something that resembled closely the way his daughter looked at things. She was still deciding about. "Tell me about Emma," she said. So he did. He told her about the spaghetti, about the drawings Emma left on every flat surface in the house, boats and horses, and what she called complicated clouds. About the way she had decided at age 5 that her stuffed rabbit's full name was Sir Biscuit III and would answer to nothing else, about the school science project that had gotten slightly out of hand and temporarily housed 17 caterpillars in the kitchen. Sophie laughed quietly, carefully, like someone who hadn't done it in a while and wasn't sure the machinery still worked, but she laughed. When Daniel stood to leave just before 2 o'clock in the morning, Sophie said, "Thank you for coming. You didn't have to." "I know. Why did you?" He thought about it honestly. Put his hands in his jacket pockets because it was snowing. He finally said, "And you were alone. And some things are just obvious." She watched him go. In the doorway he paused. "I'm going to come back tomorrow," he said, "with better hot chocolate." Fair warning, he didn't wait for a response. But halfway down the hall he heard something from room 214, very faint, very brief, the sound of someone deciding to let themselves be found. He said stood there a moment in the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Down the corridor, a night shift nurse pushed a cart without looking up. The hospital smelled the way hospitals did, antiseptic and cafeteria coffee, and the particular stillness of a building that never fully slept. He took the elevator down, pushed through the front doors into the cold. The snow had lightened while he was inside. The parking lot was empty and blue-white under the lights. His truck sitting where he'd left it with a thin new layer of white on the hood. He brushed it off with his sleeve, got in, sat for a moment with the key in the ignition and the heater running. He thought, "I don't know anything about her." He thought, "I don't know anything about her." He thought, "I know she called a stranger at 1 o'clock in the morning because she needed to not be alone." He put the truck in gear and drove home through the empty streets, and the snow fell behind him like curtains closing. And he didn't think much about anything else until he turned onto his own street and saw the kitchen light he'd left on, burning amber in the dark. He came back the next morning with 2 cups from Roaring Fork Coffee on Main Street. Actual chocolate, actual coffee, not a vending machine in sight. Emma was at school. He had 4 hours before his first appointment at the shop. Sophie was sitting up when he arrived, hair brushed, back straight. The IV was still in, but the worst of the gray had left her face. She was reading something on a tablet she closed quickly when he knocked. "You remembered?" she said. "I said I would." He set the cups on the tray. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than expected." A pause. "The nurse said you were here until nearly 2. She told you that?" "She told me the mechanic who drove through a blizzard for a wrong number is, and I quote, very tall and not bad at all. A flicker of something warm. She's 72 and completely without shame." He lady, D, sat down. She handed him half of the muffin the hospital had left with breakfast, and they ate in the kind of comfortable silence that Daniel had learned to recognize as trust, not the absence of conversation, the presence of enough safety to not need it. After a while, she told him the truth. Her name was Sophie Lauren, as in Lauren Global Media, the communications and publishing conglomerate that her grandfather had built from a regional newspaper in 1959 and that now controlled 47 media properties across North America and Europe. Her father had run it until his death 3 years ago. Since then, the board had run it, and since then, her uncle Victor Lauren had been the board's most influential member. She told it without drama, which made it worse somehow. The way she recited the facts of her life, the company, the board, the dead father, the circling uncle, with the flat precision of someone who had told it so many times in legal contexts that the emotional content had been deliberately excised. She was not performing strength, she was the other thing. The thing past performance, someone who had simply run out of people to be honest in front of, and had decided in a hospital room at 1 o'clock in the morning that a mechanic from 3 miles away was close enough. Victor is 61 and has wanted to run the company since he was 30, Sophie said. Her voice was even factual. He's patient, he's smart, and he has been waiting for exactly this moment. Me, in a hospital bed looking fragile with a medical file that will become public record the moment any legal proceeding begins. And proceedings are beginning. He filed a motion 3 days ago to have me declared temporarily unfit to exercise executive authority. She said at the way people say things they've been rehearsing to keep the words from having weight. The board votes in 3 weeks. Daniel looked at his coffee cup, thought about what it meant to be 32 and fighting for the thing your father had left you from a hospital bed in a town where you didn't know anyone. What are you going to do? Fight, she said. No hesitation. I'm going to leave here in 4 days and walk into that boardroom and remind 43 executives why my father chose me. She paused. I just need to do it without looking like someone who had a cardiac episode last Tuesday. That's the plan. That's the beginning of the plan. She looked at him steadily. The rest of it involves you. If you're willing to hear it, she laid it out plainly. If you're willing to hear it, she laid it out plainly. That was the thing about Sophie Lauren. Daniel would come to understand she did not soften things, did not wrap proposals in flattery, did not build toward a request through a corridor of softening language. She said what she meant, and she said it looking at you directly. She needed someone beside her, not a bodyguard, not a PR consultant, someone who would stand next to her at the board reception next week, and at the shareholders' dinner the week after that, and at whatever other event Victor chose as the stage for his next move. Someone who simply, by being present, communicated that Sophie Lauren was not alone, was not isolated, was not a woman whose illness had stripped her of the people in her corner. Victor will tell the board I'm vulnerable, she said, and I am medically at this moment. What I need is to walk in, looking like a woman who is loved. Not because it changes the numbers, because it changes the story. You're asking me to pretend to be your boyfriend. I'm asking you to be my friend. The pretending is mostly for the cameras. Daniel sat with that for a moment. He thought about the shop, about Marcus, his one employee who could handle the bookings, about Emma, who stayed with his neighbor Mrs. Caldwell after school on the days he ran late, about his life, which was quiet and small and manageable and entirely unprepared for whatever world Sophie Lauren inhabited. He thought about the last time he had been in a room with genuinely wealthy people, a vendor dinner. 2 years ago, when a parts distributor had taken him and 3 other shop owners to a steakhouse in Aspen, and everyone had ordered wine by the glass price without looking at it. He had been aware the entire evening of his hands, the grease that never entirely came out from around the nails, the way his jacket sat on his shoulders like it was apologizing for something. He would feel that 10 times over in whatever rooms Sophie Lauren moved through. He knew that going in, he looked at her lying in the hospital bed with the IV line in her arm and the monitor making its small patient sound, and he thought, this is someone who has been let down by the people who were supposed to be there. He recognized it because he knew what it looked like from the inside. That particular posture of someone who has stopped expecting rescue and started planning instead. I'm a mechanic from Aspen, he said. I drive a 2009 Tacoma. I own exactly one Blazer and I bought it for my cousin's wedding in 2021. I know your people are going to investigate me. The minute I walk through that door, they already have. She didn't look apologetic. You were honorably discharged from the Army after 4 years. You moved to Aspen when your wife left because her parents are here and Emma needed to stay near family. You've run Hayes Automotive for 3 years. You have no debt beyond the shop loan and a very manageable mortgage. A pause. You called 911 twice in the last 2 years, once for an elderly neighbor who fell on the ice. Once for a teenager who wiped out on a bike trail near your house. Both times you waited with them until the ambulance arrived. The room was quiet. I didn't need to investigate you to know you were trustworthy. She says, Aid, you drove through a blizzard at 1 o'clock in the morning for a stranger. That told me everything, but I needed the board to be able to see it in a file. He looked at the window. The snow had slowed to something light and intermittent, flakes drifting rather than falling. I'm not going to lie, he said. Not to reporters, not to your board, not to anyone. If someone asks me directly what the nature of our relationship is, I'm going to tell them we're friends. That's all I'm asking you to do, and Emma stays out of it. Completely. Completely. He stood, picked up his empty coffee cup. You need someone who showed up, he said. That's the phrase you used. Yes, I showed up. So yes, he held out his hand. She shook it. Her grip was firm and her palm was warm, and she met his eyes without blinking. It was the strangest agreement Daniel Hayes had ever made. It was also, he would later think, the most honest. Sophie was discharged 4 days later on a Tuesday morning when the sky had finally broken clear and the mountains stood hard and white against the blue. Drive Molina, a small, careful woman who had the habit of delivering serious information in very calm voices, reviewed the discharge paperwork and told Sophie that she was stable, that the arrhythmia was manageable with medication, that she was not to board a long-haul flight for another week, and that stress was in the clinical and literal sense dangerous for her. Sophie listened politely and then asked Dr. Molina to say that last part again about the stress. Her assistant, a brisk young man named Patrick, who had flown in from New York the previous day, wrote it in his notebook with the same expression he used to write everything calm, quick, entirely without judgment. Daniel drove her to the rented house on the eastern edge of town. It was not what he'd expected. He'd pictured something palatial, the kind of ski lodge that appeared in magazines, all glass and stone, and intentionally rustic drama. Instead, it was a modest Victorian on a quiet street. The kind of house that had been well loved for 100 years without trying to impress anyone. Sophie had rented it because it had a good fireplace and a kitchen that smelled like whoever had cooked there last had done it with care. They started with the board reception that Thursday. Patrick equipped Daniel with a dark navy suit that fit so precisely. It was clear someone had been working from measurements Daniel had not provided and didn't want to think too hard about. He drove Sophie to the Limelight Hotel. They walked in together, her hand on his arm, and the room shifted, the particular subtle rearrangement of attention that Daniel had never witnessed before. This thing that happened when Sophie Laurent entered a space. Heads turned, conversations paused, not because she was beautiful, though she was, because she occupied space with an absolute certainty that most people spend their whole lives reaching for. Victor Lauren was there. Daniel recognized him from photographs Sophie had shown him. 61, silver-haired, with the particular kind of amiability that powerful men use to make their power look accidental. He crossed the room toward them within minutes, hand extended, smile broad. Sophie, you look well. His eyes moved to Daniel, with a practiced assessment that tried to look casual. And you must be the friend, Daniel Hayes. Daniel said, shook the hand, held the grip a beat longer than comfortable. Good to meet you. Victor's smile stayed in place. His eyes did not. They did a quick inventory. The suit that fit too well for someone who claimed to be a mechanic. The hands that gave it away anyway. The posture of a man who was relaxed, not because he was at ease, but because he had decided to be Victor, was good at reading people. Daniel could see that. What Victor saw when he read Daniel, he wasn't sure, but he saw him cataloging, filing, beginning to form a plan. A woman materialized at Victor's elbow, late 50s, steel-framed glasses, the practiced smile of someone whose job was to be present without seeming important. She introduced herself as the head of investor relations. She asked Daniel what he did. He told her he ran an automotive repair shop. She maintained the smile with genuine effort and excused herself within 90 seconds. Later in the car, Sophie looked out the passenger window at the dark mountains and said very quietly, "He's already moving." What does that mean for the timeline? It means we have less than 2 weeks before he does something loud. Daniel drove. The town lights fell away behind them, and the road went dark and snowy and silent. And he thought about the expression in Victor Laurent's eyes, not hostility, which he could have worked with, but the specific calculation of a man deciding how small a problem was. He tightened his hands on the wheel. It happened by accident, the way most important things did. Emma's school let out early on Friday, a professional development day, announced on a note Daniel had not read carefully enough. He got the text from Mrs. Paverton-Telpent. He got the text from Mrs. Caldwell at 2:15, a few hours before he was supposed to pick up Sophie for the shareholders' cocktail event, and he was halfway through a brake job with grease to the elbows. He called Sophie. "I have a complication," he said. "What kind?" "The 8-year-old kind." A pause. "Ring her," Sophie said. "Sophie, the cocktail event isn't until 7. It's barely 3. Bring her. I'll figure out something for her to do while we get ready." He arrived with Emma in tow, backpack still on. Hair escaping from the braids he'd done that morning, smelling faintly of the school cafeteria and holding, for reasons she had not explained, a pine cone, Sophie opened the door. Emma looked up at her with the unself-conscious assessment of small children who have not yet learned that it is rude to look at people very carefully. "Are you the lady from the hospital?" Emma said. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I am," Sophie said. "Your dad told me about you. You like cold spaghetti for breakfast." "Not every day," Emma said with some dignity. "That's reasonable. Your house is big," Emma observed. "It feels smaller when there's only one person in it." Emma considered this. Then she held out the pine cone. "You can have this," she said. "I found it. It's good luck." Sophie looked at it. Then she took it both hands. "The way you accepted something that mattered." "Thank you, Emma." They built a snowman. It started because Emma noticed the snow in the backyard was exactly the right consistency. Wet and packable, she explained. You could tell by squeezing, and because Sophie had no good reason to say no, Daniel watched from the back porch with his coffee still in his work clothes. And Sophie was in a cashmere sweater and borrowed boots that were slightly too big, and Emma was directing operations with an authority that would have seemed excessive if the snowman had not been genuinely excellent. The snowman stood nearly as tall as Sophie. Emma had insisted on proportional accuracy for the head, which had led to a 20-minute technical discussion about load-bearing capacity that Daniel could hear from the porch in fragments. "You have to pack it from the bottom up. Put your hands here." And Sophie, doing exactly as she was told, following a second grader's instructions with the same focused attention she probably gave board presentations. She used a pine cone for the nose, not the one Emma had given her. That one stayed on the windowsill. A different one found under the hedge at the back of the property, brushed clean of snow, pressed carefully into the center of the core face. At one point Sophie laughed, really laughed, the unreserved kind, at something Emma said, and the sound of it went out across the white yard and into the cold air and dissolved there, and Daniel felt something tighten in his chest in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pain, the opposite of pain. The specific ache of something you didn't know you were missing until it was right in front of you. Later, driving Emma home while Sophie got ready, his daughter said from the back seat, "She's sad, Dad." "What makes you say that?" She laughed like she was surprised it still worked. Daniel looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, entirely matter-of-fact. "When are we seeing her again?" Emma asked. He didn't have an answer. He told her soon. He told himself it was just an arrangement. The story broke on a Wednesday morning 10 days after Sophie's discharge. In the way stories like that broke everywhere at once, as if the information had been seeded across multiple outlets simultaneously, which of course it had. Daniel saw it on his phone while he was unlocking the shop at 7 a.m. A photograph of him and Sophie at the limelight reception, his hand at the small of her back. Both of them turned toward Victor Laurent in what looked, he thought, like an entirely ordinary conversation. The headline beneath it read, "Lent Heiress's mystery companion, who is the Aspen mechanic." By 8 a.m., there were 3 news vans parked on the street outside Hayes Automotive. By 9 a.m., Patrick had called to brief him on the secondary angle, a follow-up piece clearly sourced that laid out in methodical detail the nature of their first meeting. Wrong number, hospital room, 1 o'clock in the morning. Words like stunt and orchestrated and convenient floated through the text like accusations trying to look like questions. At 10 a.m., a man in an expensive coat knocked on the glass door of the shop. Daniel let him in because he was a paying customer, theoretically, or had booked an appointment online at some point in the last 12 hours, which Patrick would later determine had been paid for with a credit card registered to a shell company that traced eventually to a holding firm in Delaware with Laurent family connections. The man introduced himself as a representative of certain concerned board members. He set a number on the table, $2 million, in exchange for Daniel Hayes stepping away from his association with Sophie Laurent publicly and permanently. Within 48 hours, Daniel looked at the number on the paper. He looked at his shop at the lift and the tool chest and the coffee maker on the back counter that he'd had since the army that made coffee which tasted like ambition and burned rubber. $2 million. He turned the number over in his mind, the way you turned a stone, looking for something underneath it. $2 million was the shop paid off, was Emma's college, and then some was the kind of security that a man who'd spent 6 years rebuilding from nothing looked at and felt the pull of a physical thing like gravity. He looked at it for a long time. Then he thought about room 214. About a woman who had called a wrong number because she needed to not be alone. About the way she had taken a pine cone from a second grader with both hands like it was the most important thing she'd been given. "Is this offer from Victor personally?" Daniel said. "Or is the board aware you're doing this?" The man's expression tightened fractionally. "I'm not in a position to, because if the board authorized this," Daniel said, "that's one kind of problem. And if Victor did it without them, that's a very different kind of problem." He folded the paper, set it back on the table. "Either way, the answer is no, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave before I start charge. In you for shop time." He drove to Sophie's house at noon. She opened the door already knowing Patrick had sent her the same coverage, a curated summary at 7:15. She was dressed and composed, but her jaw was tight, and her eyes had that specific brightness that Daniel recognized. By now, as the face she wore when she was managing the distance between what she felt and what she showed, he timed it, she said. "Shareholders' call is Friday. He wanted this in the air before I could shape the narrative. Sophie, he sent someone to buy you off, didn't he?" Not a question. "Yes, and you're here. I'm here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her posture changed. Not collapse, not relief, but the very particular kind of softening that happens when you stop bracing against something and realize the wall behind you is still solid. "Okay," she said. "Then we're doing this the loud way." The press conference was Sophie's idea. Patrick's execution, Daniel's presence. They held it at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning in the lobby of the Hotel Jerome, which Sophie chose deliberately, a building that had stood in Aspen since 1889, that had outlasted booms and busts and everything in between, and that communicated by its very architecture the concept of endurance. 43 journalists, 12 cameras. Victor Laurent was not present, which told Sophie everything she needed to know about how confident he had been that this would never happen. Sophie walked to the podium in a charcoal wool dress, her hair back, her posture exactly as Daniel had seen it in the board reception, that absolute occupation of space. She did not use notes. She began with the medical facts, the cardiac arrhythmia, the treatment, the prognosis, excellent, stable, not something that impaired executive function in any clinical or legal sense. Dr. Molina had provided a written statement. Patrick distributed copies. Then she told them about the phone call. She told it plainly without embellishment, a wrong number at 1 o'clock in the morning. A man who didn't have to stay on the line, and did. A man who didn't have to drive through a blizzard to a hospital for a stranger, and did. "I am going to tell you something, Sophie," said that Victor Lauren's motion assumes is not true. "I am going to tell you that the strength of Lauren Global Media has never been its market share or its revenue. It has been its judgment about what matters. My grandfather knew that. My father knew it, and I know it." She paused. "What matters is showing up. You can automate a lot of things in this business. You cannot automate showing up." She turned briefly toward Daniel, who was standing to her left. Not behind her because she had placed him there deliberately. Parallel, not subordinate. "Mr. Hayes is my friend," she said. "He came when I needed someone. The fact that the board considers that suspicious tells you something about the board. It tells you nothing about him." 3 hours later, the narrative had turned. Not because of Sophie's words, though they were careful and exact and landed where she aimed them. Because the photographs circulated. The snowman in the backyard. Sophie crouched down to Emma's height, both of them examining a section of snow with the focused concentration of people solving a genuine problem together. Daniel at the edge of the frame, coffee in hand, watching with an expression that the photographers had captured entirely by accident and that no PR consultant in the world could have staged. The photograph was taken by a wire photographer who had been stationed outside Sophie's rented house on the afternoon of the snowman, hoping for a shot of the two of them together, expecting something formal, staged the choreographed body language of a manufactured relationship. Instead, he got Emma directing Sophie's ha and placement on a snowball with the focused authority of a small foreman, and Sophie following instruction with complete seriousness, and Daniel 30 feet away, not watching them, but simply being near them, the way people are near things they love when they think no one is looking. The photographer had hesitated before filing it. It felt, he would say later in an interview, too private. Then he filed it anyway because private was exactly what the story needed. That evening, 3 board members called Patrick directly. They had questions. They wanted to schedule calls with Sophie before Friday's shareholders' meeting. Victor did not call. His silence, Patrick noted, was a kind of answer. The board voted 17-12 in Sophie's favor. Victor's motion failed. He retained his board seat for the moment because Sophie chose not to push for his removal. A calculation that Daniel didn't fully understand until she explained it. Victor defeated and remaining was useful. Victor removed and martyred was dangerous. She had learned this, she said, from her father, who had been a patient and strategic man. For 3 days it felt like the crisis was over. On the 4th day, Dr. Molina called. The follow-up imaging had identified something that the initial cardiac episode had not, a structural abnormality present since birth almost certainly, but asymptomatic until now. The episode had been a warning. The underlying problem would require surgery, corrective, definitive, with a recovery period of 4 to 6 weeks, and a surgical window that Dr. Molina recommended opening within the month. Sophie told Daniel on a Sunday evening at the kitchen table of the Victorian house, with the fire going and snow falling again outside, and Emma's pine cone on the windowsill where Sophie had put it the first day and left it. She said it the way she said everything, directly, factually, without seeking reaction. The done diagnosis, the procedure, the timeline, the odds which were good, the risks which were real. When she finished, Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then when? 2 weeks, here at Street Vincent. Dr. Molina has the best outcomes in the region for this specific procedure. Does Patrick know? Patrick, no. The board will know Monday. The public. She paused. I'd rather they didn't until after. Okay, she looked at him. You don't have to, Sophie. He said it quietly, not sharp, just complete. Stop finishing sentences that end with me not being there. She was still for a moment. Then she nodded. One small, careful movement. The surgery was on a Thursday. 7 in the morning. Emma was at school. Daniel was in the waiting room outside the surgical wing at 6 o'clock to 45 with 2 cups of actual coffee from Roaring Fork that he had no one to give to, and a paperback novel that he did not read a single page of for the next 4 hours. The waiting room had a window. Outside it the mountains were white and enormous and indifferent in the way of beautiful things that predate human trouble. He sat with his hands around the cooling coffee cup and thought about the night in January when his phone had rung and he'd answered it, how the entire geometry of the last 6 weeks traced back to that one decision. Not a grand decision, not a heroic one, just the ordinary refusal to hang up on someone who needed to not be alone. He thought about all the versions of that night that could have happened instead. The version where he looked at the unknown number and let it go to voicemail. The version where he picked up said wrong number, apologized, disconnected, said wrong number, apologized, disconnected. The version where he stayed on the line but didn't get up, didn't dress, didn't drive 22 minutes through a blizzard to a hospital, where he didn't know anyone. All of those versions were reasonable, none of them had happened. There was a boy in the waiting room, maybe 12, doing homework on a tablet while his mother sat beside him with her hands folded and her eyes on the middle distance. The boy finished a problem, showed it to his mother. She looked, nodded. He went back to work. The whole exchange took 6 seconds. Daniel watched it and felt something he couldn't quite name, something about the particular comfort of being witnessed by someone who loves you. The way it made even a waiting room into a bearable place. He thought about Emma, who had said she laughed like she was surprised it still worked. At 11:20, Dr. Molina came through the doors in her scrubs. She looked at Daniel and nodded once, and the specific quality of the nod told him what he needed to know before she said a word. The procedure went well, she said. A word. The procedure went well, she said. She's in recovery. She'll be awake in about an hour. Daniel let out a breath he'd been holding apparently for 4 hours. Can I room 214? Dr. Molina said with the faintest trace of something that was almost a smile. Same as before. She asked us to tell you he was there when Sophie opened her eyes. The recovery room was quiet, machines. Afternoon light coming through the window at a low angle, turning everything gold. She looked at the ceiling first. Then she turned her head. She found him. She reached out and her hand found his on the rail of the bed, and she held it with a grip that was still weak from the anesthesia, but entirely deliberate. "I don't want you to pretend anymore," she said. Her voice was rough, stripped down. "I don't want it to be an arrangement. I don't want." She stopped. Her eyes were fully open now and clear, and something in them that had been carefully managed for 6 weeks was simply gone. "I don't want to not say it because it's complicated." "Say it," Daniel said. "I want you there," she said. "Not because it looks good, not because it looks good, not because it changes the story. Because, you're the person I want to be there." He didn't say anything right away. He held her hand and let the room be quiet for a moment because some things earned their silence. "I know," he said finally. "I've known for a while and I drove through a blizzard at 1 o'clock in the morning for a wrong number," he said. "I think you can work out what my answer is." Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was the color of something beginning. Spring came to Aspen the way it always did, not all at once, not dramatically, but in small, persistent negotiations. The snow retreating from the south-facing slopes, the aspen trees beginning their annual argument with the cold, tiny leaves, insisting on themselves against branches that still held winter in their grain. Sophie spent 3 weeks recovering at the Victorian house. Dr. Molina came twice a week. Patrick managed the company remotely from a rented office on Main Street and stopped looking panicked around week 2, which Daniel took as a good sign. Emma visited every afternoon after school and became gradually and without any announcement, simply part of the texture of the house. She left drawings on the kitchen table. She taught Sophie to play the card game she'd invented, which had rules that shifted whenever Emma was losing. She brought Sir Biscuit III on 2 occasions, which Sophie treated as the serious honor it was, and she asked questions with the directness of someone who had not yet learned that certain questions were not asked. "Are you and my dad in love?" She asked this on a Saturday afternoon in early March, looking up from the card game without any particular drama, as if the question had been waiting its turn in an orderly queue. Sophie looked at Daniel. "Yes," Sophie said. Emma nodded, satisfied, and returned to her cards. "Okay," she said. "I thought so. You look at each other the same way Mrs. Caldwell looks at her garden." "How does Mrs. Caldwell look at her garden?" Daniel asked. "Like it's the most important thing she grew." The evening Sophie gave him the key. Emma was asleep. It was a Wednesday, the 3rd week of March. Snow falling lightly beyond the windows of the Victorian. The last snow of the season, probably the kind that arrived like a footnote, something remembered on its way out. They were in the kitchen. Sophie had made dinner. She had discovered during the recovery that she liked cooking, which surprised her more than it surprised Daniel. And the dishes were done, and the fire had gone down to coals, and Emma was asleep with Sir Biscuit III and 6 of his associates in the guest room. And the house was that particular kind of quiet that is indistinguishable from peace. Sophie went to the counter, opened the small ceramic bowl, where she kept receipts and rubber bands and the random detritus of daily life. Came back to the table. She sat down a key. It was plain silver, the kind of key that came with a house, not a safe or a cabinet or a sports car, just a key. "This isn't the key to the Laurent apartment in New York," she said, "or the house in Connecticut or anything that has a staff." She paused. "I bought the house on Bleecker, the one with the garden that needs work and the kitchen with the original tile and the backyard big enough for a snowman." Another pause. Emma approved the backyard specifications. "She sent you a list of requirements," Daniel said. "She emailed it to Patrick," Sophie said with diagrams, a beat. "He forwarded it to me. It was very thorough." Daniel looked at the key on the table. "Sophie, I know it's fast," she said. "I know it's complicated. I know your shop is here, and Emma's school is here, and your whole life is in Aspen." She met his eyes. "So is mine now." She pushed the key slightly toward him. "I'm not asking you to rearrange in anything. I bought the house here. I'm OpenEye. Ange Laurent Global Regional Office in Denver, 40 minutes away. Patrick has already started worrying about the altitude, which is honestly his problem." A small smile. "I just want to stop living in a rented house. I want to live in a place that's ours." He looked at her for a moment at the person. She was not the A's, not the patient, not the woman who had needed protecting, the person who had taken a pine cone from an 8-year-old with both hands, who had built a snowman in borrowed boots, who had said, "I want you there in a recovery room," when her voice was rough from anesthesia and she had nothing left to manage. He thought about what it meant to buy a house in Aspen when you ran a media company headquartered in New York, about the board calls she would take from a kitchen table in Colorado, about Patrick's altitude, anxiety, and the Denver office 40 minutes down the valley, and all the small, deliberate, irreversible decisions a person made when they were not just visiting someone's life, but asking to be led into it permanently. She had not asked him to come to her. She had come to him. He picked up the key. It was lighter than he expected. Keys always were. The weight was never in the object. The backyard better be exactly as advertised. He said, "I made no promises about the backyard." Emma did. "Take it up with her. She's 8. She's extremely thorough." He was quiet for a moment. "Then it's a long way from a wrong number at 1 o'clock in the morning." "Yes," Sophie said, "it is. And here we are anyway. Outside, the snow fell in slow, unhurried flakes, catching the light from the kitchen window before disappearing into the dark yard. The town was quiet. The mountains were enormous and still. The fire had gone completely to embers now. Just the glow of it, the warmth that persisted after the flame. Daniel closed his hand around the key. For the first time in for the first time in long time, longer than he would have known to measure. Before tonight, he was not thinking about what came next. He was not planning, or calculating, or keeping track of what needed doing. He was simply here in a kitchen that smelled like dinner and pine smoke, and the last snow of winter, with his hand around a key and this woman across the table from him, and his daughter asleep down the hall with a rabbit named Sir Biscuit the Ray. He was home. In the morning, Emma would wake up and want cold spaghetti. Sophie would make coffee with the seriousness she brought to everything that mattered. The mountains would still be there, white and enormous and indifferent. The aspen trees would keep arguing with the cold. None of that had changed. Everything had changed. He had answered a wrong number at 1 o'clock in the morning in the middle of a blizzard because a woman's voice had been thin as paper, and the snow was falling, and some things were just obvious. He had not known, driving those 22 minutes through the dark, that he was driving toward anything in particular. He'd thought he was just going to make sure a stranger was okay. He'd thought it was a finite thing, an hour, maybe 2, then back to the ordinary shape of his life. But there was no going back to that shape. It had changed while he wasn't watching, the way shapes do when something is added to them. You didn't notice the shift until you looked at where you'd been, and couldn't quite picture it anymore. Couldn't remember what the kitchen had felt like before someone started leaving drawings on the table. Couldn't recall what the mornings had been before 2 cups instead of 1. Some things were just obvious. He set the key in his pocket. He stayed.